Hey everybody, FarFetched here. We're going to be doing a comment response today because I got a pretty interesting comment from GF Savages. So, I think people who overlook weak characters in storytelling like to project themselves into the story. The problem with doing that is that it becomes very easy to ignore character flaws. Weak character motivation can be replaced with your own desires and aspirations. Amoral or out of character actions can be rationalized with one's own biases and life experiences. One dimensional characters can be made complex by filling the gaps with our own lives, etc. Essentially, all the coping mechanisms that we have in real life go a long way in how the viewer/reader can prop up characters. Don't necessarily disagree there. Again, my bet is that people inserting themselves into the narrative, but I also completely understand where they're coming from. Escapism at its purest is just that. If I recall, though I'm a little rusty, one of the ways you can use a hero's journey is a more abstract representation of ideals or desires that guides you through an adventure, like how Luke Skywalker seeks a greater purpose in his life and yearns for adventure. His character motivation is simplistic enough for us to empathize and relate to him, and it's not a stretch to insert ourselves in his place and reason how we'd act similarly when pitted against the forces of evil threatening what we love and all that jazz. Saying that Luke Skywalker has no character or development would be objectively wrong. There are definitely ways to make a character you're able to insert yourself into the narrative and explore ideas and themes. It might even be the most popular form of storytelling. Maybe that sounds obvious, but it's not the intense character studies that typically get mainstream attention. Funnily enough, to this conversation, it's TV shows that really lead themselves to this. So I guess there's more ammo for your argument. Too long didn't read. A lot of anime fans would be better suited playing D&D. So I don't necessarily disagree with this comment on a fundamental level. I do think that, yeah, there are a lot of people who insert themselves into the story. But I think that there is a distinction to be made when discussing Western media and anime. Or not even necessarily Western media, but I guess just maybe you could call it neurotypical media, because anime is a highly autistic medium. This much has been talked about for ages. I mean, we know that anime characters' big eyes are, indicative of this. Sonic has the same concept, where the big eyes allow for an easier time reading a character's emotional state. Stuff like that. So it's not a stretch to say that anime is an autistic medium. So, and if you know anything about autism, you know that autistic people tend to have a hard time viewing the world outside of themselves. So it makes a lot of sense why anime would attract a lot of people who project themselves onto the story. If you've ever been on 4chan's A board, there's a huge discussion about main characters all the fucking time. Everybody's always shitting on Shinji because they view him as a pussy, essentially. Who they don't relate to at all. I've always found this weird because if you don't relate to an anime character, you don't relate to an anime character. It's as simple as that. I mean, I don't relate to 99% of anime characters. There's a few that I do, and when I do, it's a very strong relatability. Because I think anime is kind of, in a lot of ways, a cult of relatability. I think in many ways, anime characters are designed to be highly relatable. And I don't think they're designed to be relatable in the same way that a character who's designed to be relatable in a Western context would be characterized. In Western or neurotypical media, a character who's relatable is going to be relatable to the widest audience possible. Luke Skywalker is a great example of this because Luke Skywalker is a character who represents ideals. He's a character who has very relatable motivations over a very wide audience. Everybody, I suppose, can relate on a certain level to Luke Skywalker. But when it comes to anime finds its relatability through specificity. And what I mean by this is anime characters are highly specific. They have highly specific traits, highly specific ways of being, ways of thinking, and all of that is meant to reach as specific of a niche as possible, as far as I have come to understand. A character like Madarame from Genshiken is a character that I don't think every otaku is going to be able to relate to. I think he's a pretty relatable character. I find him almost indistinguishable from myself in a lot of ways. But these are characters who, when shown to an average person, you probably wouldn't find much in common with this person. On the other hand, I don't find Luke Skywalker to be at all relatable. I find nothing to connect to with Luke Skywalker. I find myself to be wholly disparate from Luke Skywalker. Now, that doesn't mean that I think that Luke Skywalker is a bad character. I think Luke Skywalker is a fine character. He's not my favorite character by any means. In fact, I don't particularly like Star Wars, so I never found Luke Skywalker to be all that intriguing of a character to study, because it's just not something I'm interested in. But overall, I do think he is a decent character. But I don't think he's a relatable character. See, when you project yourself onto a character, I think a lot of people might be able to look past their character flaws and insert their own. Some people might be capable of doing this. I am not. I have never been able to look past any character flaws. If you don't like a character, if a character is a character who you don't relate to, or a character who you don't think is specifically relatable, some people are going to take that and think that they don't like the character, as a lot of people do with Shinji Ikari. I think it's most dangerous with the main character. But the fact that so many people shit on main characters, or characters that are designed to be relatable when it comes to anime, is indicative of the fact that most anime fans don't really look past that sort of thing. Maybe they can. Maybe they're capable of it. But I don't think it's as widespread as this comment is making it out to be. When I watch anime, what I'm looking for is a character to connect to. And it's not necessarily a character to project onto. It's a character who I can empathize with. A character who I want to see succeed. A character who I want to spend time with. And by watching the anime, I am spending time with them. It is time spent observing them, essentially. And when I come across a character who I do find to be specifically relatable, even better. They become one of my favorite characters, assuming that they're characterized well. I have run into plenty of characters who I thought if they were characterized with more depth, I would find them to be highly relatable, because in many ways on perhaps the surface level, or what bits of characterization they do get, I did find relatable. But me finding them relatable doesn't mean that I was able to look past what they did wrong, essentially, in terms of characterization. I think my main issue that I presented in my last video, where I said that people will focus way too much on narrative and not nearly enough on character, wasn't so much that people were, I suppose, ignoring character, as much as they were placing too much weight on the narrative. And because I spent most of the video talking about character, because I was sort of trying to make the point that character was what was the most important part, and not narrative. Whereas maybe I should have focused a little bit more on the ways in which that narrative wasn't as important. But I think ultimately I made myself rather clear. I think that essentially you don't even need a narrative in a show to make it good, as evidenced by Slice of Life. Overall, don't necessarily disagree, but when taken in the context of anime, I think that's just sort of the point. Every character is meant to be relatable to somebody. That's often why you have such a diverse cast of characters that have such different personalities. One, because the different personalities work well off of each other, So I guess maybe from an objective point of view, you can look at it and say, well, these characters all have interesting dynamics. But from a more subjective perspective, you can sort of look at it in the sense that each of these characters is meant for a different type of person to relate to, and to be able to put themselves into that situation so that they can better understand the show and its messages and what it's trying to say, because the characters and being able to put yourself into their shoes, especially when it's an autistic medium, and people of who are autistic generally have a harder time doing that. And I'm using autistic in a very, very broad sense, by the way. If you're into anime, you're probably autistic. Now, if you're just into like shonen and Dragon Ball Z kind of stuff and just barely scratching the surface, then that's more on the side of being trendy. Whereas actually being really deep in anime, if you've seen my bedroom, covered in anime posters, right? If you're at all into anime in that sense, or you're just really into it, and you're into all sorts of different types of anime, or maybe you're just into one type of anime really, really hard, you're probably autistic in a very broad sense. So that's what I had to say on that.